Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Addendum with me, your host, Imperial Dane, discussing today a bit the issues that overall feel troubles the Wehrmacht as a faction. It's sort of the fact that there's sort of always a bit of a sticky situation in a sense. I mean, it has some flexibility, but it never really excels in an area. As a player who plays a lot of Wehrmacht, but also a lot of allies, it tends to be the faction you sort of feel like you have to put the most effort into to sort of get good results, and where it can the most quickly just turn very sour on you. I mean, you can certainly do a lot of impressive things with it, but you can also very quickly just find yourself in a bad spot and get punished really hard for it. So, what is it the sort of as a sort of core level sort of troubles of Wehrmacht? Because you know, a lot of people say it's doing the Panzer IV, is this or it's that, and I think it goes a bit beyond that. In part, the issue is one I've sort of always felt is basically the Wehrmacht from Companies 2 is basically the Wehrmacht from Companies 1, which is already there, you know, like by the time Companies 2 was, I think, 7-year-old faction, and now by now we're sort of like 5 years into it, so we're about a 12-year-old faction, but at the same time lacking some of the core elements from the Companies 1 faction that sort of made it in this already here. One of the issues is compared to all the other factions, which are comparatively newer with new ideas and newer concepts, the Wehrmacht is practically archaic as a faction in comparison, with its 4 tiers, which pretty much no other faction has in the game at the moment, but the Wehrmacht has. I mean, that for starters already just something to point out. I mean, compared here with the Wehrmacht with the USF, and you just sort of got like, oh hey, I tank and then I can move straight on to medium armor, for example. I can go for all this and this maybe, but even then you don't really have to, and you're not particularly hit hard for it, which of course compared with also the fact that with the Americans you get 3 units on top of your tech, so not only the tech is cheaper and you have less of it, you get free stuff with it further on, compared with the Wehrmacht, which actually has to do to tag up, for example, then build, which again is a lot more time and resource invested. You know, here just tech, get a free unit, and then you have it ready. You don't even have to post into it. So in that regard, there's just already here, for example, between the USF and the Wehrmacht, just a huge difference in time and resources between teching up. And unlike, you know, the USF, you do not get, you know, free units. And while the Brits, for example, don't have, they also just have cheap tech. In fact, they have even cheaper tech. They have even shorter tier levels. So in that regard, the Brits are even faster than the Wehrmacht, yet also having a lot of some of the elements that the Wehrmacht has. So in that regard, the Wehrmacht is being held back in a lot of ways. Furthermore, a lot of the core elements that make the Wehrmacht in Companies 1 work aren't there. I mean, you have the sort of same small squads compared to the Allies. The problem is that when in Companies 1 you had medic bunkers that could replenish your losses, you had purchased veterans that could help offset. Of course, the problem there was they basically made it all bulletproof infantry, which is definitely something I never agree on is the right way to do it. And then finally, you had, you know, elite infantry at the sort of later tiers. You had, you know, some of the best tanks in the game. Here, you don't. I mean, again, as everybody knows, the Wehrmacht Panzer IV compared to a medium tank is more expensive and not quite as, you know, capable in most ways. Plus, it just takes longer to get out. So if you rush the Wehrmacht, if the Allied player decides to rush out, then medium tank, you'll usually find yourself a bit behind in said race. And if you do rush ahead, they can still get out a medium tank at the same time you do in most cases. So in that regard, as the Wehrmacht, you just don't have any of the sort of particular advantages to sort of, for example, get back into the game of push elite you had in Companies 1. Yet again, you're very much restrained by the same elements like smaller squad sizes. In fact, even smaller, because the Wehrmacht at least had 5-man full grenadier squads. You don't. And you had, of course, other things that sort of help make up for the losses, or just, you know, managed to rush ahead. At least you had some slightly better medium armor. But you don't here, and that sort of thing. For example, the Panther, which in Companies 1, you know, was pretty tough, isn't. While it's tough, it doesn't quite have the same punch it did. Similarly, the Panzer IV again is rather behind. So you sort of end up with a faction that has a lot of the restraints plus more, is pretty much in terms of the design archaic compared to the other factions, which just get lavished with power creep and new ideas, which just allow them to be so much more smoother, flexible, in particular with the Americans, than the Wehrmacht. You're sort of in the situation that, well, what are you supposed to do if you fall behind? Because that's really the Wehrmacht's biggest problem. If you fall behind as the Wehrmacht, you're quickly getting into a world of hurt compared to any other faction. And you don't have any way to, you know, sort of really switch it around besides hoping your opponent plays terribly. I mean, you don't have Knights cross holders anymore. You don't have any way you're sort of slowly swinging the game in your favour through some kind of attritional play. You just don't have it. And that's sort of the problem with the Wehrmacht. Again, you're sort of tied down by a lot of old ideas, which then don't even have the sort of the full element to them, which at least would have made them sort of more viable. While you go up against all these factions which just get so much more than you do. And that's basically the Wehrmacht's problem. Old ideas that were never brushed up on, while everybody else sort of got all the new cool stuff. And lastly, as the Wehrmacht, you're sort of in the spot you sort of have to make do with a lot of very old toys in comparison to sort of talk design than any of the other factions. I mean, you have so many more weaknesses. For example, if you use your pioneers, so you have to get them if you want to take up. So in that regard, there can be an even higher cost to taking up as the Wehrmacht. If for some reason you lose your pioneers, demo charges can just wipe your units left and right. And compared to the Wehrmacht, you just don't really have a lot of those options for wiping out your opponent's units in the same way. So there tends to be sort of this very unpleasant thing. If you can get ahead with the Wehrmacht, but you have to stay ahead, otherwise things can very quickly turn ugly. Compared to us, the Allies, I feel when you play as the Americans or the Brits or the Soviets, have a much better ability just to bounce back against my opponent. Like, oh, I made a mistake. Well, it's not so bad. I'm the Americans. I get free units with my tech. I have easier tech, cheaper tech. Shermans that outperform my opponent's Panzer IVs through sheer flexibility, but also just roughly better stats. I mean, has slightly less armor, but has better armor penetration, has high explosive rounds, 50 caliber millimeter machine guns, self-repair, smoke screens. The Panzer IV gets nothing like that at all. It has some slightly decent veterancy, but it requires getting there in the first place, which of course is the other issue, is the Wehrmacht getting a unit's veteran, when it comes to the armor. So in that regard, it feels like the Wehrmacht needs an overhaul. And of course, the question is, how do you do it without just, upsetting the entire Allied player base, because all of a sudden they have to put in some effort versus the Wehrmacht. But at the same time, that has to be something that changes, something that has to make the Wehrmacht better, but at the same time maybe avoid cheesy just spam it all stuff, because then we gotten about nowhere. So what could be done to at least make the Wehrmacht feel a bit more fresh, but at the same time just not make it another steamroller faction? Well, overall, for starters, I think, needs to happen with Tier 4 for the Wehrmacht. Like, the Panther needs to become better, and there needs to be some kind of elite infantry unit at the Heavy Panzer Corps, so when things go sour, you can actually have a chance of sort of bouncing back. You get slightly hit, you might actually be incentivized to then push out some elite infantry. I mean, I just recommend maybe some kind of reskinned Obersoldat with some slightly different veterancy, and there you go. But it's probably with veterancy I'd sort of look into doing the most of the Wehrmacht, because the Wehrmacht is, stuck with a lot of, again, old veterancy abilities. Really, lots and lots of them compared to all the other factions. So the Soviets got more unique veterancy abilities now than the Wehrmacht, and they started out in the same place, yet the Wehrmacht never received anything there. So in that regard, there's plenty of room to do something with the Wehrmacht there as well, Look into, giving some more interesting abilities. Grenadiers could get, access to grenades as a regular version, or maybe a mark target ability. They had that fact back in the old beta for companies too. The Grenadiers, for example, in fact, also the Pentagon had a mark target ability. That could be an idea, just something there. Or they could give the Grenadiers, a suppression ability that veteran free for the light machine guns. That way, just punishing units running about and running straight at them. There are a lot of options, but some for the Wehrmacht Panzer IV, and I'm talking the regular one, I'd probably recommend, actually giving it a starting ability, because, it's sort of the ability you sort of get the most chance of actually displaying skill. That way you have to manage them, you have to sort of manage the skill itself. And you also sort of see that's probably one of the bigger differences between your really good players and mediocre players. It's how they use their abilities, doctrinal abilities and unit abilities. So I think, that way just giving the Wehrmacht more abilities, overall giving them more flexibility, veterancy wise, and otherwise, could do a lot for the Wehrmacht. So how would for example, do it with the Panzer IV? Well, I'd probably look into, giving it, a better blitzkrieg. Give it the old blitzkrieg back, where it actually gets, boost the rate of fire. That way you can be more aggressive with it. Get more rewarded for flanking, dealing damage, rather than just a speed ability. And I would also probably recommend giving it some kind of an additional ability. Just starts out with another high explosive round ability, maybe some kind of heat round, or I don't know, some kind of suppressive fire ability for its machine guns. So anything in front of it just gets suppressed, sort of like spearhead mode. Maybe you can get a bit of range when it's spearhead mode, and that way you can sort of use more to support infantry, just push ahead. I mean, that could be one way of just giving the Wehrmacht Panzer IV a bit more to work with and a bit more oomph. Similarly with the Stug, you give it like Veteran 2, where it actually is the weakest because it barely gets anything worthwhile there that does anything. Even the armored skirts there basically don't do anything. It's like maybe 20 to 30 more armor, which against most tanks and anti-tank guns basically does bugger all. They could give it the supporting fire ability, allow it to bombard units. They could give an ability so it gets better with infantry around it. A lot of things could be focused down there. Would just give it better armored skirts. Give it more armor at Veteran 2. That could also do a lot there for the Wehrmacht Stug. And for the Panther, again, better blitzkrieg, some kind of ability as well there. Could be a lot of things they could do. Maybe some kind of ability so it works better with infantry or something. There's a lot of options there, but I think the key lies in just giving them more abilities. Some veterans, some not so much. Pioneers, depending on your upgrade, could access the booby traps or smoke grenades. Panzer Grenadiers could get an ability of working together with tanks, a bit of combined arms ability there, which is what the Wehrmacht rather actually did in the war, and which the Americans get an ability for, but the Germans, the Wehrmacht, does not. That's all one of the things I found a bit weird and a bit awkward. But overall, what needs to happen is the Wehrmacht gets more options on a tactical level. They get more ability. They get more ways of flexing skill, because currently that is the one thing they really lack, and that also means they have sort of hard time, pushing any advantage more seriously. But also in some ways getting back. But of course, again, giving them better elite infantry unit and maybe slightly buffing some of the later armor, again like the Panther, could help a bit there with the Wehrmacht. Though I think it needs to be happening with skills, abilities. Again, sort of different sorts of abilities for the units. That way, again, allowing the Wehrmacht player to that way in a different way. I mean, in part, again, you look at the Stormtroopers. They're one of my favourite units. They're also one that I think they can really be played well because it has abilities like tactical advance or the ability to spot tanks. It rather makes them very flexible. It's also one of the units that can sort of really, I think, punish the Allies quite well if handled correctly. So in that regard, I want to see more units sort of like the Stormtroopers, again, more with flexible ability that gives them more options under the right circumstance, even depending on upgrades. So again, suppression fire for the Grenadiers with a light machine gun team. That will help them, for example, offset allies with double BARs or double Bren guns or double Vickers Ks, double you name it. Panzer Grenadiers with the ability to mark out targets for new units nearby them, for example. Half-tracks, for example, could get a suppressive ability. I mean, the old Wehrmacht half-track had that. That wasn't exactly a problem, but just some light suppression. Even the suppression ability could do a lot. They can give the Wehrmacht flexibility, and that's really what it needs. It needs flexibility. It needs a way of actually reacting and sort of pushing something ahead there, because currently, again, most of the other allied factions can just sort of push ahead with either raw force or just, well, more raw force, because they don't necessarily need to have to flex their abilities because it's not particularly necessary versus the Wehrmacht. So I think that's sort of, I think is what ails the Wehrmacht. Again, it's a very, very old faction, because again, if you sort of draw lines back to Companies 1 again, we're sort of looking at 12 years with no real serious overhaul. In fact, again, it's in fact weaker than that one, because a lot of things have increasingly been taken away from it without being given back in some kind of new way. Plus, again, just power creep from all the other new allied factions. So I mean, if we were to do it simplest, I think just giving them some abilities here and there and some of the more core critical units could do a lot for the Wehrmacht, and just give them a, fresh breath of life. Does it ever happen? Maybe, I don't know. But if they ever get around to patching Companies 2 again, this is what I really want to see them, focus on. Giving the Wehrmacht some bloody abilities. So there you go. Just a quick Propagandacast Addendum here with some of my thoughts there, because it's only something that's been, going on in my head for quite some time. So also is something, when you see a lot of people discuss the Wehrmacht, they sort of have all the sort of own thoughts on it, but it's sort of overall what I think sort of, needs to be done to, make the Wehrmacht a fun, playable faction again. So there you go. Hope you enjoyed this. If you didn't, subscribe, like, share, and comment on it. And of course, a big thanks to all my Patreon supporters, without which this episode would not have been possible. So thank you all, and see you all another time. Cheers.